So welcome everyone to this episode of the Conscious Shift series in the Legacy Life podcast. I am very excited to be talking to Louise Day today, partly because I've had a little gap with recording episodes for this podcast. And this episode has just flowed. It has just dropped in off the back of, I was watching a program the other day called Inside Our Autistic Minds, which, yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that during the episode as well. But, you know, I come across parents who are asking themselves, either overtly asking themselves or other people, or in the background, that those thoughts are going on is my child neurodiverse? You know, is there something I need to know? Is there something going on with them that needs extra support or different knowledge to what I have? Or, you know, how can I support my child be fully themselves, and often that comes from quite challenging behavior that is going on. So welcome Louise, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
It's so great to have you come on. I know we've been talking about doing this for ages, haven't we?
Yeah.
Probably about 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's great to finally do this. So Louise, tell us who you are and what you do, so people get an understanding of who you are, really.
Yeah. So I'm Louise. I'm a mum of two. One of my sons is going through an autism diagnosis. He's 5. And for the last 14 years, I've worked with children with various disabilities, non-speaking children, children who are autistic, have learning disabilities, and then about 10 years ago I trained as a speech and language therapist. So I've been working since then in special schools, in the NHS, in various settings, really focused on autistic children and non-speaking children. And then about 18 months ago decided to go out myself, create my own private practice to really help a small kind of amount of families in a really intensive, focused way. And I've really focused on non-speaking children. That's my passion. That's where I feel I can help the most. And I've helped children sort of under the age of 5 and their parents. I help their parents feel really confident about helping their child, about helping their child make progress, about understanding their child. And I really help the child to find a means to express themselves.
Brilliant. Oh, it's so great to have you on and be able to chat with you today and find out more about your experience with pre-verbal and non-verbal children and things that parents can do. And because I knew I was going to be interviewing you, I just wanted to give people an opportunity within my community and some of the communities I hang out in, an opportunity to ask a question. So I've got a couple of questions for you today as well, which is great.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Parks. I'm the host of this podcast, and I realize I haven't introduced myself. And I work with families. I work with parents to really help you create the family life you truly desire and work with those family dynamics. And unlike Louise, I work with people from, roughly around age 2, their children often are when they come to me, into adulthood. So I don't specialize in a specific age group. So I work across all age groups. So, and one of the things that I love to do is to meet amazing people like you, who I can confidently refer to, for my parents that have, particular challenges going on. And so I'm so excited about this conversation.
I know. I think that's the amazing thing I've noticed since being self-employed, that just the networks out there and all the different professionals that work with parents and that support children, and the amazing people you get to meet, and kind of learnings that you have outside of an organization is amazing. So
yeah, it's so cool, isn't it?
yeah.
So one of the quotes that came up for me yesterday when I was thinking about this interview, and I remember coming across this, and just because I've worked in the area of communication for a long time, and is that 7% of communication is through words, and 55% people is body language. And then you've also got tone of voice. And I think what people think about with the tone of voice is they link that to words, but of course you can not use words and still have a tone of voice, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think there's a lot of this is the Conscious Shift series, right? And I think when I look at the world, there's a shift, big shift, that I think needs to happen in terms of awareness, in terms of education, and in terms of how people think about communication.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've had to make that big shift myself, as a parent and as a speech and language therapist. I think just learning more about inclusive societies and what's called neurodiversity affirming society, which is really what we aim to have. And I know we've had this discussion before about various labels and where people sit in their feelings about that, and that's very individual. But absolutely, just accepting differences, celebrating differences, and recognizing differences, and that there's not one way to communicate or one way to see the world or one way to connect. It's very unique to that person and that family.
And you mentioning that the program that I watched the other day, did you see it as well? Yeah, Inside Our Autistic Minds. It's on the BBC if anybody's wanting to go find that, with Chris Packham. And yeah, so Murray, who was one of the people in that, who it's interesting because obviously he can't use words to speak, but obviously I was just so moved, and so what an advocate actually for people who are in that situation where they can't necessarily speak, because the assumption is, so a bit about my background is I used to work as a communication support worker using BSL, sign language. And that the assumption, if somebody doesn't speak, it often, and in our history, right, and so with deaf history, deaf and dumb is what people used to, they're deaf and dumb is how people were viewed. And so that assumption that somebody is stupid or not intelligent if they don't speak, right? So so that is massive. And it was, so that part of the program was just amazing. And all that, like I said, that body language, that communication that is happening, that when you open up and you open your awareness, you get to see that, and you get to see that from your child. So I mean, I use sign language because of my background with my children from when they were babies. So they signed before they could speak. And so actually I've got a question from a lady, and one of the things, she'd started using sign language with her child, and because they weren't signing back, like it's this thing of, when you talk, like when we start talking to our children, we they don't talk back for ages.
Absolutely.
But we don't assume, well, they're not going to talk, or there's something wrong if they're not talking back to us yet, right? So I'll go to this first question because I think it kind of fits in with where we are. So Ellen Ward asked this question in Edinburgh Under Fives, which is where I put my invitation to ask questions. And following from watching Chris Packham's first episode, how would you start in finding ways of communicating, E.g., do you try sign language first? Which sign language? How do you know if it's working? There's lots of questions here, actually. When do you try something different, like flashcards or technology? E.g., when my son was pre-talking, I tried signing, Makaton, but I had no clue if he understood, as he never signed back or indicated he got what I was trying to say. After a couple of weeks, he signed to my sister, who was babysitting him, but he never signed to me. So it was going in, but for some reason he never responded to me. I've just noticed reading that she said a couple of weeks. Like, a couple of weeks is nothing. Can I just say, a couple of weeks is nothing.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing in terms of expecting a response. But anyway, I'll let you pick out some aspects of that to respond to, Louise.
Yeah, no, great question though, absolutely.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And isn't it interesting that he used the sign to communicate with another family member, because actually maybe he feels like he is completely understood by you. He's able to use body language or gesture, or you as his mum is able to anticipate his needs. So actually, what a great tool to teach him, that then he's been really clever about thinking, I'm going to actually use a sign with my auntie, because she maybe doesn't know what I'm wanting.
That's
but
such
yeah,
a good point. That's such a good point. It reminds me of my daughter doing the same thing, like with her grandmother not understanding her. And then she, you know, so she tried saying the thing and then she didn't understand. So she tried signing the thing, she didn't understand. So she tried something else, you know. It's like,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. The only slightly limiting thing about signing in that context is that if the person you're signing to doesn't know the sign, then that becomes difficult, doesn't it? Because then they've got to, you know, get in touch with the signer and say, like, who, you know, what did they mean when they said this or when they signed this? But I guess I like to think of the way that I work is I have a sort of toolbox of various different approaches that include sign, using and interpreting the child's body language, facial expression, any natural non-verbal communication they have. And also in the programme, you saw Murray used alphabet printed letterboards on paper. He used a voice output aid where he typed and then it would form sentences and speak it out for him. So, you know, I try different approaches with a child and also have kind of backups in terms of technology and things that are not so technological for that child. So it is a bit of trial and error, but it is also giving things time. You know, because obviously with the signing, that's a few weeks. So it's kind of trying to manage expectations and think, well, you know, how long will I set? Will I set 6 months? Will I set a year? And that might be working with a speech and language therapist to, you know, set those goals and think, you know, how long are we going to give this? But I think also is that in terms of the results, you know, I think we do want to see results and we want to see the child sign in. The parents that I work with want to see the child using their communication device or book straight away. But that's not always going to be the result. It's sometimes going to be that you are modeling lots to your child and showing your child how to communicate, and that the child's learning and understanding, but that you might not instantly see the child use that approach. So it can take lots of time. It can be that the child never chooses to use that approach. But it's not that you've wasted your time, because you've built up language there, you've supported them with their attention, you know, you've supported lots of sort of cognitive skills with them, and really kind of tried to aid them if they're struggling to speak. You know, you're trying different things. So nothing's ever really time wasted, I wouldn't say.
That's such a good point. You know, I think it's so important for people to know that it's cumulative, isn't it? And everything is supporting each other, really, all those different aspects that you mentioned there. So yeah, I'm just thinking, what else did she ask in there? Yeah, so you covered finding ways and sign language. What type of sign language she mentioned there? Do you have any thoughts about that?
So in terms of a child, like a child who's maybe like a baby or a toddler, there are sort of baby sign language and toddler sign language classes that you can attend. But there's also two sort of key ones that I've come across, which are Sign Along and Makaton. So I know that she mentioned that she used Makaton, and it doesn't really matter which one you choose. Typically, unless there's any sort of hearing differences, you probably wouldn't use BSL. because it's more of a language. You wouldn't use it in its full entirety. That seems to be more amongst the deaf community and people who, you know, have hearing differences. So sign along or Makaton, and Mr. Tumble uses Makaton. So I suppose it's just making sure if your child watches Mr. Tumble and is copying those signs, that you then try to explore Makaton as opposed to kind of mixing sign along and Makaton, trying to stay kind of consistent within that system. But they're both very similar, and are quite easy hand shapes to do. They've been simplified for people who might have like motor difficulties or a learning disability. So yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because even when you use a particular sign, you know, because I signed with both my children, my eldest more so actually than my youngest, and I went to like a sing-along class. They used BSL actually at that particular class that I went to, and obviously with using BSL myself, I use BSL with my British Sign Language, that is BSL, with my with my daughter, but they develop their own signs as well. So this is the thing, their version of a sign will look different. And I remember when at age 1 my eldest went to nursery, and I literally wrote down, these are all the words, these are the signs, this is what they look like, this is how she does them, to hand over. That they weren't quite as I don't think they really signed with her, and I think she just but her vocabulary was quite large for a 1-year-old, really, because she signed. But I think maybe she just, I'm not sure how open they were to that, really, because I was like, well, just ask her, she'll tell you, was my view, because I knew she had quite a large vocabulary in sign language, more than probably in speaking. But anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating, it really is.
Yeah. So but yeah, they have their own versions, so you know, it won't necessarily look exactly like the signs anyway, you know.
Absolutely.
But it's like having that openness and noticing. It is that it, because in my work I talk about listening, like the basis of everything that I do is about listening and understanding and observing your child, communicating with your child, right? But listening isn't just about ears, it's not just about what you hear. Listening is actually observing as well. Like there's a whole picture, not just the words they say, but their body language is a massive part, their tone of voice, or you know, what their breathing, their, you know, if they're or a you know, you can see when somebody relaxes, you can hear when they relax, you can see if they're annoyed, you can hear in their breathing they're annoyed. You know, there's so much in terms of communication that is visual, that we can see, we can feel, and there's a whole energetic aspect as well, which, you know, I think a lot is something I'm talking more and more about these days as well, which is, yeah, like trusting that sense. So I think sometimes if people don't get a word or something like that, or a sign, for instance, they might not notice that they're picking up other communication, because it doesn't look how we've been taught that communication should look, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I do try and talk to parents as much about that as possible, like using their intuition as well, because it's fascinating how a parent, you know, knows that when a child looks a certain way, that it means that they want something from the kitchen, or, and it can just be so subtle, and you just think,
it is, isn't it? It's so subtle. Yeah,
absolutely. But yeah, like, you know, empowering that parent to know that actually, you know your child really well, your child knows themselves really well, and you know, you giving them that power, you know, and you know, I know myself as a parent, I've given my power away to other professionals, thinking they'll be able to tell me what's best for my child, they'll know, they'll have the answers. But actually, you know, me and my son are really have the answers together.
you do. And I want to just emphasize that, you know, and you know your child best. Like, if you're listening to this, just hear that again. You know your child at best. No expert does. They don't spend the time with them to know them as well as you do. They don't. And I think it's important to use support and use experts to inform what you are doing with your child. But at the end of the day, you are the expert, and there are people like Louise here, like lots of people who can support you. But, you know, part of our role as parents is a leadership role in your family, you know, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily see themselves as that. You know, people will say, I'm just a mum, right? So you are, yeah, I think that this aspect of really getting what an incredible role it is as a parent, but also just how much knowledge and understanding that you have of your family, like nobody else has that and ever will, and or ever can.
Absolutely.
So you're amazing. Everyone do a dance and go, I'm amazing, I'm amazing, yeah, I'm amazing, because you truly are. So I've got another question for us. And this is a great one from Dandy Rose in my How to Talk So Kids Will Listen UK group, which is my free parenting group that I have. I'd love to know if there are precursory signs of a meltdown that the untrained eye cannot detect, specifically in neurodiverse children. I've thought about this a lot, but meltdowns just appear seemingly out of nowhere. I'm wondering if this is straw breaks camel's back territory, and if so, can it be avoided? Child is verbal and articulate, but only 3.
Yeah, really good question. And perfectly linking into what we just said, you know, it's interesting, like untrained eye, and that you know, sometimes people believe that, you know, I would be able to see more about their child than they will.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do point things out, like, oh, actually, I think, you know, they're using this to communicate, and let's, you know, build on that. Absolutely. Sometimes I do notice things, but the parent will have subconsciously noticed that and just not kind of, you know, received it yet. But what I'm trying to say, let me think, what am I trying to say, is that, okay, so there will be possibly signs that are going on. Yes, many children will go into meltdown very, very quickly. Some it will build up. For some, it could be reacting to something in that moment. So it could be the bright lights. It could be the fact that they know that something's about to change in the environment, or you've missed a step in the normal routine. I suppose it's waiting until that event's over, and then maybe just looking back and thinking, like, was there anything about that might have unsettled my child? Was it anything to do with sound, anything they saw, anything to do with the routine? Did something end? Like, did I turn the TV off and they were quite enjoying that? You know, it could be obvious, it could be really not obvious at all. And I suppose in terms of autistic children, there can be, you know, signs that, you know, they're getting into distress. So it might be repetitive movements that they might do. It might be, so they're called stimming behaviours. And they might maybe do something like flap their hands. They might put their hands over their eyes or squeeze their eyes shut. I know my son often squeezes his eyes shut. Particularly maybe if we have to have a conversation with him about something, you know, that wasn't okay that he did. So it'll be very, very individual to your child, the things that they'll do. They might, you know, shake their head or make a certain noise. So it is really, really individual, and it's just spending that time observing, like Sarah talked about, and just, you know, we live in this really busy world where we kind of run about and we get the kids out the door and we do this and we do that. But even just spending a few minutes a day just sitting with your child, what do they look like when they're calm? What do they look like when they're happy and enjoying something? What do they look like, you know, when they're distressed? And just seeing if you can pick up on any of those subtle sort of non-verbal, because it probably will be non-verbal.
Yes.
When a child's going into distress, they probably won't have access to speech and language. So despite your child being verbal, it'll probably be subtle non-verbal. So the parents already aware there. You know, that's the first stage, isn't it? That awareness. They're already aware, like, are there actually some things he's doing that I could identify quite quickly?
So have have a look at that, what Louise has said, you know, have a look at, because you do actually know, you know, you have seen it, and you know, like Louise says, it can be quick, that change. You know, I see it in my household as well, particularly with my youngest daughter. You know, when there's a change in the routine or a change in the structure, like unexpected changes, it is very difficult. And so, you know, can go from absolutely fine to really quickly. And it's okay. You know, I think often parents want to avoid those big emotions at all costs, and that, you know, I talk about this a lot, and so I have this program called 4 Steps to Help Your Child Manage Their Big Emotions, where we really break down bit by bit, looking at what your automatic reactions are that actually might be adding fuel to the fire, for instance, because there are certain things that we do that can be unhelpful that we don't realize we're doing. So it's like uncovering those things that are hidden from our view, you know, that are common things that parents do, like we all do them. So, and seeing that and having the knowledge and replacing that is massive. But yeah, to check in with and see how that is, but also that it's okay if your child gets upset, like you haven't done anything wrong, right? It's part of being human, having emotions and responding in different ways. So what I always say is the goal isn't to stop your child getting upset. It's not to stop them having a meltdown. It's to support them, for it to move through, for whatever needs to be expressed to get expressed, to allow them to move back to that place of equilibrium with themselves, you know. So because I think we can, as parents, end up walking on eggshells trying to prevent, you know, having prevention as the goal. And, you know, and it's great to reduce, you know, it's exhausting if you're having lots of that happening. So it's great to be able to reduce that down. But we all get upset. We're all going to get upset at some point. We all have feel overwhelmed, or you know, have meltdowns, or, you know, as adults we do as well, you know. So I think that's so important to say, that it's not about stopping the feelings, it's about allowing them, it's about holding space for them to move through and to happen. I
really like that answer as well. I was totally thinking along those lines, you know, of my own lessons about my child, you know, my son, and some of the, you know, the things that really I found quite uncomfortable, you know, when he was throwing things around the room, or hitting, you know, his sibling, and it just really like triggered a part of me almost. But you know, when I heard somebody say, like, your child's in distress, you know, and there's a reason why, you know, he's doing this, he's not challenging, you know, you're finding it challenging, and he's actually distressed. Or, you know, what's the emotion behind that? Is he frustrated? Is he, you know, is he anxious? Like, what's going on? It really, really helped me, actually. And it helped take the focus off me, like, I've done something wrong, this is my fault, which I hear so often with parents, you know, it's not your fault. Your child's being, you know, they're in a human body.
Being human. Your child is being human. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I've got some questions I always ask on this podcast series, or I mostly ask, which is, how do you feel you're contributing to a shift in consciousness when it comes to the field that you work in?
So I really see my role as, you know, supporting other people, educators, professionals, you know, to develop more inclusive practice, to shift, you know, their mindset in terms of what's this normal sort of approach versus, you know, we're all different, this diverse society.
Mm.
And I think we've still got, you know, a while to go in that journey. You know, it's a journey, you know, shifting parents' mindsets and beliefs about, you know, there's not something wrong with your child, and there's not something wrong with what you've done. You know, your child sees the world in a different way, and, you know, maybe has a slightly different kind of brain processing pattern, but, you know, that your child's different. There's nothing wrong. So, you know, it's becoming more conscious of children, what's good for them, listening to children. You know, I'm really, really passionate about listening to children, you know, watching their play, advocating for their play and their work. You know, that should really go on for a long time in their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm involved in lots of kind of work around increasing the school starting age, because I feel that would really support children, you know, increasing it to 7, to ensure that children have that time if they do have differences in, you know, or even speech and language delays in the early years, that they're given that time to kind of you know, flourish and develop language skills and play a lot so that they can express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole Upstart campaign, isn't there, in Scotland? And if anybody's listening, there's an episode in this Legacy Life podcast with Sue Palmer that you can check out. It'll be it's about episode 5, something like that. So go back, have a look if you want to check that out, around raising the school age and you know, the benefits of that. Yeah, it's thank you for sharing kind of where you sit and how you see things. So what do you think the 3 things that people really need to know? Is there sort of 3 things you could think that people need to know, or would be helpful for them to know if they are in a position where their child, they're at that, maybe the early stages, maybe where their child is kind of non-verbal? Because the lady who asked the first questions or series of questions, her child's 18 months old, because I asked her, because I was like, I don't know what age this child is. Yeah, so what's the 3 bits of advice you would give people at that stage?
Yeah, I think a lot of parents that come to me, you know, are really, really worried and fearful of the future, and they're thinking way ahead. Like, they're thinking, my child's 2, but I want to know what school they're going to go to. Like, I want to know if they're going to go to mainstream or a special school, or if I'm going to have to look into private schools. And literally, parents will lie awake at night Googling schools and thinking, what am I going to do? And that's 3 years away. So you don't know how your child's going to develop in that time, what things are going to look like, if they're going to get a diagnosis, if they're not. You know, there's so many unanswered questions. So I think the first thing is just starting where you're at and really focusing on where you are right now, because there's lots of things that we don't know. We don't know if your child will speak. You know, we're not sure what means they'll use to express themselves. But right now, what's going on for you, and what can you kind of focus on right now? And that's where I kind of help with strategies and support packages and things. So that's the first one. And the second one kind of ties into that, which is actually everything is going to be okay, because that's what I really needed to hear as a parent. You know, it was a completely different scenario, you know, supporting families with autistic children versus going through that journey myself as a parent without the professional hat on, and being really, really worried all of a sudden, that because I'd seen what families had gone through, that it can be quite challenging, that it can be emotional and also amazing and relieving in many things, a great teaching and lesson. But I was really, really worried. And when somebody said to me, look, it's going to be okay, like, you're going to work this out, your son's going to be all right, you know, everything's going to be fine. I think just having that reassurance and knowing that whatever comes up in the future, you'll be able to, you know, cope with it. Whether that's with a bit of support or what, you know, usually support is key, obviously. But yeah, so that everything's going to be okay is my number 2. And number 3 is, you know, try to reach out and ask for support. Have a look at what support's available out there. There's a great new charity, Stand, it's just been set up by parents of neurodivergent children and children who have disabilities and various communication needs. And I find that really, really helpful to speak to other parents who know what I'm going through and who share that experience. And I know the parents I work with find that really useful. And it might not be, you know, it might look different support for you. It might look like, you know, having one-to-one support and, you know, going through some of your own kind of beliefs and getting support for your own health and mental health. Or, you know, it might be a group, or it might be a place like the Yard in Edinburgh, which provides, you know, a play, an inclusive play place for you and your child. So it'll look different for different families, but don't be afraid. Don't feel like you don't deserve the support, or your child's maybe not autistic enough, or, you know, or they're, you know, you are entitled to support, and it will really, really help you in your journey.
Brilliant. Thank you. They were a great 3 bits of advice. And to remember what we talked about earlier in this conversation, that remember that you are the expert. Remember that all of these resources, all of these things are to support you and your family on your journey. And because I think it's important to remember that and come from that place, actually, of remembering that yeah, that you're there all the time, so you get to see all the stuff. So, you know, I really want parents to feel empowered, and to remember that, because it's so key, you know. And I know I've my children have severe allergies when they were young, that mostly grown out of now, but, you know, so I've been around, you know, quite a lot of experts in different ways, and it is easy to give your power away. It really is. And if you do that, you know, be kind to yourself that you've done that as well, and you know, come back to that place of knowing, actually, you know, if something doesn't feel right. So I did a podcast episode which I will be sharing, and in that, this was a big thing that came out in that, actually, was if somebody's saying something to you and it doesn't sit with you, and it doesn't, even if they're an expert, like, trust yourself, because you know your child best and you know your family best, right? So if it doesn't sit right with you, it might not be the right thing, you know. So, you know, to listen to yourself, listen to your child. That feels like a really great place to finish up today. It's been amazing to have you on, Louise, and talk about these things. And I know you're currently in that place of, you know, getting a diagnosis at the moment, or in that whole journey yourself, aren't you? So all the best with that. And I know it can be incredibly positive to help to work out what's going to best support your child, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. That was amazing.
So fantastic. And check out the show notes. So there are notes below, so you can find out more about Louise and how you can contact her if you need any more support. Also, how you can connect in with the support that I offer through the conscious parenting community, and the various things that I do as well. And we'll get in there some of the information that we've talked about in this episode as well. So we'd love to hear what you take away from this episode. What is it that you've learned today? What is it that you'll be taking away? Do you know, write a response, or you can, you know, reach out to us as well. So thank you for listening today, everyone.